Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I've really been enjoying making Underworld videos for you all. They seem to have gone down really well, but something that I actually haven't covered was just explaining vampires, werewolves, lycans, hybrids, just the supernatural creatures from the franchise in general. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their powers, their traits, and everything in between. So before I move on to focus on another franchise, don't worry, I will return to Underworld, it's just to keep the channel fresh. I thought to myself, let's do one big huge explanation on all of the supernatural species. So as I said, let's look at vampires, werewolves, lycans, hybrids, genetically enhanced lycans, spiritual vampires who can travel to the other side. Let's just cover them all in today's video for all of you. So here it is, every single supernatural species from Underworld explained. So what I really enjoy about the Underworld vampires is the fact that the writers do honour tradition by incorporating some of the most well-known weaknesses for these vampires, sunlight being the most prominent. They do however go down the scientific route by highlighting that it's actually the UV rays that do the damage and not the sun itself, as traditionally vampires are forbidden from walking in daylight and are condemned to being creatures of the night, meaning it kinda gets a little religious and supernatural. It's like God's punishment to them and all of that. I like the science behind the UV rays being the thread. I like the idea that it's basically all down to the genetic code, the DNA they possess that has such vulnerabilities. So let's talk about that as we move forward. All vampires contain traces of the Corvinus strain. This is directly from Alexander Corvinus, the first ever immortal. He's not a vampire or a werewolf. He's a man who was born with mutated DNA that prevents the aging process and also gives him super strength, speed, agility, but none of the weaknesses of vampires. It's his son Marcus, also born with his father's immortal DNA but bitten by a bat, that resulted in him becoming the first ever vampire that all vampires currently in existence have been created from. Marcus was the strongest and most powerful vampire in existence for the majority of his life. From his line, he turned Victor and Amelia into vampires, meaning that they both have the strongest strain of Marcus's DNA within them. All other vampires created from then on, not from Marcus basically, had a more diluted version of the strain, and so on until we reach modern day vampires who could have been created from basically any random vampire. That means that Marcus, Victor and Amelia would be the three most powerful vampires and rightly declared themselves the Elders, the rulers of the Coven. Becoming a vampire in the Underworld universe is not a straightforward process. You don't just get bitten and then you're a vampire. It's kind of a 50-50 outcome, so to speak. Many who wish to become vampires after being bitten actually died from the aggressiveness of the strain or bled out from being incorrectly bitten in a more sensitive area. But if you can just go back to the strain's aggression for a moment, vampire transitions from the mutated Corvinus strain travel through the body, changing the genetic code and rendering them immortal. As I said, it's not always the case. The transition is extremely painful and the individual in question can succumb to the overwhelming power of it. Celine even said herself, the majority of those the Coven turns don't survive. It takes a serious case of willpower to fight, to remain alive as the body goes through the changes. Vampires are immortal, yes, but they're not dead. Their heart still beats. They don't die first and come back. Their human bodies don't die like in the Vampire Chronicles or the Vampire Diaries. The vampires can have children, although rare. It's a unique take on the species, which is why I enjoy Underworld so much. It's different. Vampires cannot eat human food. If they do, they'll regurgitate it, and with serious pain and discomfort too. They rely solely on blood, but don't have to feed every single day. However, they do heal much faster and are much stronger when they do feed most days. Some vampires can also see the memories of another through the drinking of their blood. Victor does this to discover the truth of his daughter Sonia's betrayal, and Marcus, while on the hunt for information for his brother's prison, uses this technique more than once. Underworld vampires are incredibly strong, but the stronger the Corvinus strain in their bodies is, the stronger the vampires they are. They are also incredibly fast, agile, and can heal from the majority of injuries. They are still susceptible to fatal injuries that can damage their internal organs like their heart. They have 2 sets of fangs, the outer set longer than the inner, and can take on a more monstrous facial form. Although immortality is highly coveted by anyone, even in real life, it's not to say that it doesn't come with challenges. Many vampires long for a reason to exist for such lengths of time. They long for a purpose, otherwise, immortality can become daunting. Therefore, some vampires slumber for centuries in order to leapfrog through time. Victor, Marcus, and Amelia invented a concept known as the chain. One vampire would rule for a century, while the other 2 vampires slept for 2 centuries. While the initial reasoning to prevent infighting over important decisions was the main factor, it also allowed them to return to the world with a fresh and enthusiastic approach to ruling as they learn to adjust to the new timeline they live in comparison to the one they went to sleep in. The only downside to such a process is that once they enter their slumber, they cannot awaken themselves as they need blood in order to do so. Some vampires are also able to enter the sacred world, highlighting that there is life after death, but can return from it with another special process. The Nordic vampire Coven practices a ritual where they ingest a poison that places them into a comatose state, sees them wrapped in cold, wet bandages, before being submerged into icy water, before then being hung upside down in an almost cocoon-like manner. They can learn new skills like manipulating their bodies into a somewhat misty form, allowing them to move at speeds that even a vampire eye can't detect. Lena, a Nordic vampire and orchestrator of the ritual, states that on her return, a vampire is never the same and sees the world differently. This also explains why the Nordic vampires all have white hair, due to the numerous times they have visited this sacred world. Celine visited once, and on her return, her hair began turning white underneath while keeping her original brown colour on top. I believe if Celine ventured to the sacred world again, then she'd return with a full head of white hair. The Nordic Coven also believe and have proven that water is the key to life. As I mentioned previously, vampires can produce children, although it's rare. It's not exactly known why it's so rare, but it does happen, as Sonia and David are examples of pureborns. Pureborn vampires are born without marks or scars from their initial bite, like transitional vampires. Purebloods are also viewed as a more prestigious individual, as they are the purest form of the vampire race. All vampire covens would not have survived as long as they have without certain rules in place. There are 6 rules created by the elders that were put in place to ensure the species' survival and prosperity, which are as follows. Vampires are to conceal themselves from humans at all costs unless to turn them. Vampires are not allowed to drink human blood directly. Vampires are not allowed to fraternize or interact with Lycans in any way. Vampires are not allowed to delve into certain parts of the past. Vampire elders must never be awoken from their hibernation until it is their time to rule. Vampires must never kill their own kind. Breaking any of the 6 laws will result in a judgment from the Vampire Council. That judgment is most likely always death. Let's take a look at werewolves and lycans. Werewolves, like their vampire counterparts, also stick to the traditional concept with a little twist here and there. All werewolves too have the Corvinus strain within them, stemming from Alexander. However, it's Alexander's other son and Marcus's twin brother William that this species derives its origins from. William was initially an immortal, like his brother and father, but was instead bitten by a rabies-stricken wolf, which caused his immortal DNA to mutate itself into something entirely different from Marcus, the first ever werewolf. Although sharing the same DNA, it's the additional creature's genetics that make the difference here, werewolves especially. the infected human's entire anatomy is forced into an initially painful change. Their bones and limbs elongate and stretch to twice their original size, breaking and reforming in the process. Their facial structure, jaws, cheeks, chin, all protrude outwards as it morphs into its bestial composition. The newly born creature now has incredible super strength and speed, but it is forever trapped in its wolf form, unable to return to that of a human until after its death. Now, a fully transformed werewolf, the creature no longer retains any of its human traits, as the mutated rabies virus instills an overwhelming rage that the beast cannot deny. It is a ready-made killing machine that will slaughter anything in its path. It has no control, no calmness, no sense of reality. It attacks with the intent to kill. Those left alive will turn. Those killed will also turn as the virus reanimates them after death. William, the first werewolf, ravaged the Hungarian countryside for close to 800 years as his brother Marcus could not bring himself to harm his brother. Ironically, it was due to William's behaviour that led Marcus to make more of his own kind, the vampire, in order to stop him. William was captured and placed inside a prison for all eternity, but that didn't put a stop to the werewolves thriving. These creatures were known as first-generation werewolves, direct descendants from William Corvinus. The wolves are not sensitive to sunlight, which allows them to be as dangerous during the day as they are at night. Their biggest weakness was their vulnerability to silver, which was fatal. The first gen's only goal was literally to attack and ravage as many people and as many villages as possible, if that was considered even a goal, as they just charged at whatever was in front of them. Enhanced sight, enhanced smell, enhanced hearing. They are also stronger physically than the average vampire and are unable to control themselves during these attacks, not at least until their victim was killed. The only case of a werewolf demonstrating self-control was when William was reunited with his brother Marcus, showing that it is possible but extremely hard to do so. The first generation werewolves were considered extremely feral, dangerous and disgusting monsters, with even vampires themselves refraining from placing them in the same bracket as their Lycan brethren. Vampires at one point tried to enslave and domesticate them, but to no success. There are very few first generation werewolves left, as the Lycans have replaced them as the dominant species, but it's not to say that more could not be made if the Lycans decided to do so, as was the case with Andreas Tanis, who was given werewolf guards to protect his secret lair in exile. Speaking of Lycans, well, these are an entirely different species altogether, the next stage of evolution for the first gen werewolf. The first Lycan, Lucian, was born from a pregnant werewolf, most likely a woman turned while pregnant, while in the vampire's captivity. He was born in human form and kept alive by vampire elder Victor in order to see what this boy would become. Lucian became the very first Lycan. He was immortal like his predecessors and could change back and forth between human and werewolf or Lycan form. He had all their strengths yet retained his humanity and conscious thought while transformed. Lycans were also vulnerable to silver, something they didn't evolve past. Victor decided to create more Lycans by having Lucian infect them and systematically enslave the entire race to his bidding. They would protect the castle during the day from werewolf attacks and would fight for the vampires if necessary. That was until the Lycan Uprising, an event that seen them grow sick of their enslavement and break free from the chains, which ultimately led to the Vampire-Lycan War that lasted up until the most recent Underworld movie, Blood Wars. Victor, the elder vampire, changed Coven history to make it appear as if the Lycans started the war, when in reality, they wanted their freedom. It was Victor's murder of Sonia, his own daughter and Lycan leader Lucian's wife, that resulted in Lucian's desire to take the fight back to the vampires and create the first hybrid, uniting the bloodlines and finally ending the war. Lycans also have the ability to retain their wolf strength while in human form, as we see multiple times throughout the movies. Lucian, for example, catching up with a speeding car, or Marius fighting Selene in human form and overpowering her. The majority of vampires are no match for a Lycan, as nearly all hand-to-hand combats between the two species has resulted in a Lycan victory, with Victor, Amelia and Marcus the only exceptions. Their transformations, although at will, must be learned and practiced with discipline, as they can spontaneously transform against their will under the moonlight and may become stuck in Lycan form if they can't compose themselves to return to the human state. By the events of the first Underworld movie, the Lycans have been hunted to the brink of extinction as Lucian continuously searches for a way to create the first vampire-Lycan hybrid, uniting the bloodlines. This experimenting and testing in a rundown, makeshift lab by Singe, the Lycan scientist or specialist, was the early steps that would eventually lead to the creation of the Antigen Corp, but I'll get to that in a moment. Let's go back to hybrids because Lucian eventually found a subject with suitable DNA for a hybrid status. That man was Michael Coven, the last known descendant of Alexander Corvinus. Michael was bitten initially by Lucian, turning him into a Lycan, followed by Selene, whose vampire strain finished the process, making Michael the very first hybrid. There are 3 types of hybrids. The Lycan dominant vampire hybrid, which was Michael as he was Lycan first. Michael was incredibly powerful. His eyes are completely black, his face is only slightly elongated, meaning he can retain much of his human-like appearance. His ribcage is slightly extended, he has little to no fur, and dark bluish skin. This type of hybrid has claws, teeth, as well as animalistic posture. They also possess the Lycan's signature roar. The Lycan dominant hybrid also has the ability to regenerate even after being killed. It is also immune to silver and sunlight. Then we have the vampire dominant Lycan hybrid. A hybrid who was a vampire first, on the other hand, has more physical attributes pertaining to its chiropteran ancestry, so more like a bat. While it shares the Lycan's black eyes, claws and musculature, a vampire dominant hybrid has noticeably bat-like ears, flattened to its head, a bat-like nose, no hair at all, bluish skin and taloned, retractable wings. Like vampires, it also needs to feed on blood. Marcus Corvinus is the first and only known vampire-Lycan hybrid. However, as Marcus is also the original vampire and the strongest of his kind, it can be speculated that not all vampire-dominant hybrids would have abilities as potent as those of Marcus. From my own research of elimination, Marcus is the only person who could become a vampire-dominant hybrid. The third and final hybrid is the neutral-born hybrid, which, as the title says, has to be born. The first known case was the pregnancy of Sonia by Lucian, which would have given the world what I can only assume as the first neutral hybrid, but Sonia was killed by her own father for her betrayal, but more so to prevent a uniting of the bloodlines. However, the birth of Eve, conceived between hybrid Michael and Corvinus strain-enhanced Selene, gave us the first neutral hybrid. Eve had none of the vampire or Lycan weaknesses, and her hybrid form resembles that of her father's. Black eyes, but with Selene's blue irises. She heals faster than any vampire or Lycan, and is extremely powerful and agile. She has the ability to align her brainwaves with her mother and father, which allows her to see and feel what they see and what they feel. Eve's full power is unknown, as she was just an adolescent when we meet her in Underworld Awakening, but from what she's shown, she most likely will go on to become the most powerful hybrid and most powerful supernatural individual in the history of both races. There's another category that I want to cover, and that's the enhanced Lycans. You'll remember I briefly mentioned a company called Antigen. This was a biotech company supported by world governments to experiment on vampires, when in reality, it was actually fronted by Lycans, using experimental methods to secure the survival and prosperity of their own race, while turning the humans' attention to the killing of their adversaries, the vampires. Head of research, Dr. Jacob Lane, a Lycan himself, used tissue and blood from neutral hybrid Eve in order to turn his son Quint into an enhanced Lycan. Quint underwent countless injections and treatments to get him to his super Lycan status. He grew to twice, if not almost 3 times the size of an average Lycan. his skin immune to silver, and he healed instantly. He could manipulate his limbs to change into Lycan form while maintaining his human state overall. He was literally undefeatable, and not even Selene could get the upper hand on him at any point. She actually used his enhancement against him when she defeated him, forcing him to revert back to human form by entering smaller enclosed spaces. I won't give too much away on Quint as I'll be making a video dedicated solely to him, but in terms of what he can do, you've seen it all. Marius was also another enhanced Lycan who could transform to a size similar to Quint's, however he was just a little different. He captured and killed Michael, draining him of every drop of blood. He then placed the blood into capsules that he consumed in order to acquire Michael's power. However, unlike Quint, who had access to the extensive medical research and whose injections and treatments with Eve's blood, tissue and DNA was permanent, Marius's was not. He simply ingested Michael's blood, absorbing its qualities, but like anything ingested, his body eventually filtered it out, requiring more blood every time Marius wished to change into his enhanced form. He could retain his human-like face, just like Michael could, something Selene quickly realized during their initial fight. He wanted to capture Eve and drain her like he did her father, but was unsuccessful in doing so. Guys, why not continue the Underworld journey by checking out my Underworld playlist right here? Choose from the character profiles of Selene, Victor, Marcus Corvinus, Amelia, Lucian, William Corvinus, and much more. Continue your Underworld viewing experience by clicking here.